Welcome to the Overflow Worship Podcast, where we serve and support leaders so you can serve and support your local church.
Hey everybody, welcome to the Overflow Worship Podcast. I'm your host, Andrea Olson. So today I have a guest with me, joining me across the miles. And, we have actually, if you're a regular listener, we've had some pretty incredible interviews, and it's been a really fun process for me because I've been getting to just talk with new people, make new friends from all over the world. We've had guests from Ireland and guests from Georgia, and today my guest is joining me from North Carolina, and you will not be disappointed. I'm so excited for this conversation, and I'm excited to welcome Jon Azzarello. Did I say that right, Jon? I should have asked you before.
No, you nailed it. That was great. It's good to be on. Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for being here. Usually I ask and I got distracted by all the other things, but sometimes my Minnesota accent butchers people's last names. So
you did a great job. I've heard some pretty crazy pronunciations of my name, so you did it really well.
Awesome. Sounds good. Well, Jon, welcome to the podcast. Thanks for being here. I would love it if you would kick us off and just tell everyone a little bit about you.
Yeah. So my name is Jon Azzarello. I'm a worship pastor in North Carolina in the Greensboro area, actually. So we're kind of right in the middle of the state. And our church is called Mercy Hill Church. We are we're a church plant, actually. So we've been able to experience being a really tiny mobile church, where everybody is setting up and tearing down every week. And we've seen some pretty cool growth, almost 10 years. It's been almost 10 years. So 2012, fall of 2012 is when we were planted out of the Summit Church in Raleigh, Durham. So if you know who J.D. Greer is, they're our sending church. And so now we're a multi-site church. We have about 5 campuses, and our worship team is a good size. We have a lot of volunteers, about 70 volunteers on our worship team. Wow. And man, it's been just so exciting to see what God has done and to be able to be part of that here in North Carolina. I'm actually originally from California. So I'm from the same area as Wisdom and Silicon Valley. Cool. And so anyways, I'm married. I have 6 kids.
Wow.
And so my oldest is 15. And my youngest is 4, and all of my kids, except for my youngest, have been baptized. I got to baptize my 7-year-old last night at our service. So that was really cool. So that's a little bit about me.
Wow, that's incredible. What a gift as a parent to be able to baptize your kids. And
it's been cool.
Wow, that's really sweet. Really, really sweet. So 6 kids. So man, do you guys sleep? You guys are busy, ministry and books and life and kids and all of that.
We do. We stay busy. My wife homeschools. This year's our first year homeschooling, actually. So we're figuring a lot of things out still. And I feel like we're just perpetually figuring things out. But it's great.
But that's parenting life. I feel like we're on a continual journey of learning, and that's a good thing,
Absolutely.
Just being surrendered to that. Okay, I need new mercies every day, and I need new wisdom every day.
Absolutely.
Well, I am in the homeschooling boat as well. We homeschool our 3 kids, and it's a gift. I've been doing it since our youngest was our oldest was in kindergarten, so she's in 5th grade now. But it's a gift. It's definitely there's good days and there's hard days, but just to encourage you and your wife, it is a really sweet thing. And once you find your groove, it does start to get a little bit easier. So
it's good to know.
Yeah, for sure. Well, I would love it if you would tell us a little bit about your book. So for those who are listening, Jon is an author, among the other things he already said, and he has a book that has released recently and is going to tell us a little bit about it. So Jon, why don't you jump in and just give us kind of the overview of this book?
Yeah. So I wrote a book called The Greatest Worship Leader, and I actually have it right here.
Amazing.
And I wrote this not because I'm, obviously it's not about me. That's the first thing that people are like, oh, is this an autobiography? Are you writing about yourself? I'm like, absolutely not. In fact,
that's funny.
Yeah. So spoiler alert, right? Like Jesus is the greatest worship leader, but, it's really just, it's not because I'm such an expert on the topic. It's just something that God has taught me, over my years, in ministry. And I know, Andrea, you had mentioned like, there's a lot of like, even some of the people who listen to this, like a lot of them might be like younger worship leaders or, going through change and stuff like that. College age. When I first, and I share about this in the book, but like when I first, was a worship leader, I went to Passion City. It wasn't actually Passion Conference. It was Lift Conference, if you're familiar with that. And I was so starstruck. And I was like, these guys like, Louis Giglio, Chris Tomlin, these Christian Stanfield, these guys are on stage, Christina Knuckles. Yeah. They're on stage and they're talking about probably so much wisdom, so much good biblical wisdom.
Yeah.
And all I'm doing is I'm like, what shoes are they wearing? Like, what are some of the things they say in between songs? Like, what are some of the like mannerisms that they use so that I could do the same thing? Like, that's what I thought, and it's like, we all go through that, right? Like
totally.
And that's not necessarily like wrong or anything, but that was the stuff that I was interested in. And that was the stuff in my mind that I sort of like defined success or greatness as. And so I just remember, through the years, I mean, there's just been such a journey of how God has taught me so much through so many mistakes I've made and things like that. And one of the biggest things that I have learned, even in just like my later years of ministry, has been like, man, the greatest worship leader is not the one with the biggest platform. It's not the one with the most influence. It's not, top 100 on the Billboard charts or anything like that. 1 Corinthians 13 kind of puts it like, hey, if I have all of those things, if I do all of these awesome things, but don't have love, I'm nothing. And so I feel like so what I did was I did like this deep dive study in the book of Matthew. And something that I noticed almost right away is Jesus's disciples are coming to him and they're like, what is, who is the greatest? Like, they're like wanting to compete, and like, who's at the top? Yeah. And Jesus is like, see that kid over there? He's like, see the little child? He's like, that's the greatest in the kingdom. You have to be humble like a child. And so anyways, the book kind of gets at the paradox of kingdom greatness, how it's like, we think it's this climb and this pursuit up, but really it's like a climb to the bottom. And it's this like humility. It's this caring and shepherding, just as Jesus did. And he modeled it so well, right? He was the perfect worship leader in a sense, because he was always just like pointing everybody to the Father, and he was teaching about the kingdom and so many things. So it kind of covers a lot of things that the book does, but I would say the heart of it is just like this idea of defining what success and greatness looks like for a worship leader, but really, I mean, it's for any disciple of Jesus, right? So it's like, man, what should we be pursuing? Because Andrew, we talked about a little bit, but like this idea of battling, being on stage, being in a spotlight, but at the same time being filled with humility. And it's like, you want to lead with passion and you want to be like confident, but at the same time, you're like, well, humility, and it's like, well, confidence and humility aren't opposites, but a lot of times I think we might fall into this, like, where's the tension or pit them against each other. And so we wrestle with a lot of these things just naturally in our role. And so this kind of gets at that in a really vulnerable way. Again, I didn't write it as like, hey, I'm an expert, here's how you need to do this, but rather, here's what I've learned. I've shared a lot of stories anecdotally of like, man, these are things that I had to learn maybe the hard way. And I'm very passionate about raising up the next generation of worship leaders because, I have kids who go right now who are teenagers who are in our student worship ministry and stuff like that. And it's really cool. And we have a lot of worship leaders who are younger, and they're just like, they're learning. They're just like sponges. And I'm like, man, if they could learn a lot of these lessons without having to go through some of the things I did, and figuring them out the wrong way, I think that would just be such a blessing and a gift, and a time saver, among other things, So that's kind of the heart of the book. That's kind of really what I want to get at. And so, yeah.
Wow. That's so good. It's such a necessary conversation for us to have as followers of Christ, as worship leaders. And like you said, it's not just for worship leaders, but it's very, just poignant for us, because it's a conversation that we have to have with the Lord constantly. Like, I lay it down, I give it to you, and show me how to do this, so the spotlight's not on me. And I think, I don't know, I think there's maybe a little bit of a mentality with young worship leaders that, like, eventually we arrive and it's never a problem anymore. And I mean, yes, it gets easier as we continually surrender to the Lord, but there's always going to be that tension that you talked about of just like walking in surrender. And so I think having resources and tools like your book are just such a blessing, because it helps us with heart realignment and just, refocusing. So, you talked about raising up the next generation, and that you're passionate about that. And of course, as a parent, what a gift to be able to instill that in your kids. So whether it's with your kids or with your worship team at church, because you have a lot of people that, come through the door and that you're working with and coordinating with, what does that look like from an application standpoint on a weekly basis? What are some of the things that you do whether with your kids or your worship team that help to just consistently establish and reinforce this foundation that's so needed?
Yeah, and that's such a great question, and so much to be said about that, right? But I think one of the biggest, most important things that I've learned is that in developing people and in pouring into people or mentoring people, proximity is so key. Like leadership is influence, right? It's like being able to just pour into somebody. And so often I think a lot of times churches can even fall into thinking that like discipleship is like, it's a program or it's a resource, it's like, hey, what kind of, hey, are you discipling somebody? Oh yeah, well, they're going through, these books together. But it's like, no, like, are you just like walking with somebody? Are you like being available and accessible to people? To me, that's the biggest thing. And I think, as Andrea, like you said, I mean, it's such a cool like parallel to look at like parenting as that, because it's like, hey, I can tell my kids to do this, do that, do this, do that. But if I'm not ever there with them to walk shoulder to shoulder with them and model it for them and let them just watch me, they're never going to pick it up really, and it's not like what we tell them. It's just like, it's how we make them feel. It's how we're able to be there to care for them. And so I think that, to me, if there was like one thing that is so important, like if you want to develop somebody, you have to spend time with them. And I don't just mean like in a training school classroom kind of a setting, but like you've got to be able to be like, hey, let's go hang out together. Let's go eat lunch together. Let's go do something, just like even not related to worship ministry, but just like, I've heard people say before, people who've been mentored, they're like, hey, one of the most valuable things in learning from my mentor was just being around them and their family and watching how they interact with other people, because so much is caught, not taught, and I think that is just so vital. Like if you want to pour into and mentor people, you have to be around them. And I just think that's so important.
Wow, that's so good. I love that. I want to say that one more time. So much is caught, not taught. That is so good. It's so true. And, I think in our busy world and our busy culture, a common thing that I hear from people is like, how do I find time to do that? And it's like, at least I've found, and I would love it if you would speak to this, but I have found that I don't find time, I make time. Like you have to fight for it. And, just being intentional to be in proximity with people. But what has that looked like for you with the busy life and busy family and all of that? Like, how do you make time, or what does that look like for you on a practical basis?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of times it's just inviting people into what I'm already doing in life, So I want it to look like real intentional, like, hey, like, let's go grab coffee, let's do this. But realistically, especially for like in a volunteer sense, people, they've got work, they've got school. It just doesn't always work that way. And so sometimes it just looks like inviting somebody over to dinner at your house. Like you're already going to have dinner, or you're already going to, even, and if it's not dinner, like coffee and dessert or something after, but like, hey, just come hang out. Just like, let's do a game night, Yeah. One of the things we're doing at our church right now is kind of in our worship ministry is new, that we're doing specifically that's brand new is we're doing worship leader dinners. So there's about 18 or so worship leaders on our team, and they're, this is everybody from like they're students, like we're talking about like a sophomore in high school.
That's amazing.
Through college age, through people who are volunteers to staff. And we invite everybody over for dinner a few times a year. I mean, we've done it twice. We got one coming up in about a week, and they're literally going to come to my house. They'll be here. I'm at my house right now. We'll be at our house. We'll have, 2 dinner tables set up. My wife will cook. We'll eat together. We'll hang out. We'll laugh. We'll probably play some games or do something real informal. And then we sit around like small group style and just like talk. I almost have no agenda. It's not like, hey guys, I'm going to teach you all listen. It's like, hey, I could learn from y'all, and everybody can learn from each other.
Yeah.
We all bring a unique perspective. Everybody has giftings. And I think when everybody is just like, iron sharpens iron, right? In Proverbs, it's this concept of just like everybody's hanging out. We're having a great time. We're learning from each other. One of the things that was said in our last dinner was said by somebody who's not on staff. He's like just a volunteer worship leader. But I mean, he's a worship leader, but he's an amazing worship leader.
Yeah.
And he said something talking about how he prepares. And all of the staff and all of the like veteran worship leaders were like writing these notes down. Like, Are you serious? That's such an awesome idea. So, getting to like hang out because everyone is so busy, just put something on the calendar and just like, hey, it's dinner, it's hanging out, anything with food involved, right? Is always going to be a win. So
yes, we will have food. Oh, we'll be there.
Absolutely.
Before we get to the rest of today's episode, I want to tell you about my friends at NLFX Pro. We have been working with them for quite a few years now because they come and present at our conference every year. Their owner, Ben Stowe, is a friend of ours, and he comes and tirelessly pours into our tech community at the conference. But maybe what you don't know is that they also have a music store. They sell a lot of equipment, and I recently purchased a new microphone for my recording studio from them, and it was a great experience. So I got to tell you, if you have a sound need or you have questions, maybe your church is thinking about buying some new equipment, but you're not sure where to start, they also will come in and do consultations and help you through the process of making sure that you get the equipment that you need and that is best for your context. So you can learn more about them at nlfxpro.com. Be sure to tell them that Overflow Worship sent you. They will take great care of you. All right, back to today's episode. What I love about that is there's intentionality, right? Like you're intentionally putting something on the calendar and you're opening up your home, which is so kind. And there's also a realistic perspective of like, hey, we really want to do this, but we're not going to we know we can't do it every week or every month. It's like, we're going to be realistic and say, a few times a year, we're going to be intentional to do this and make sure that it happens. And I would imagine, as you said, it's new, but I imagine down the road, it's going to be something that people look forward to and really like, oh man, we get to do this. There's one coming up. I'm so excited.
Absolutely.
And that's
been the feedback. That's already been the feedback from the one we did already. So it's been, it's definitely something we plan to keep doing. So
that's so cool. That is so cool.
Yeah.
There was this girl that I mentored for a lot of years, and now she's a worship leader on staff in a church, and it's really fun to see that unfolding. But it's like, I didn't realize, 10 years ago when she was 14, and she was just like, I noticed that, wow, she's like really good at acoustic guitar for a 14-year-old. Like, you should play on the worship team. And she was kind of like, oh, I don't know, And and I had no idea at that point, though, that just the little things that I was stepping into that were just in front of me and doing with her were impacting her life in such a great way. And that's not because I'm awesome. It's because God just kind of grabbed me and was like, look at this person in front of you, like, just like pour into her. And I was like, okay,
Yes.
I can do this one step at a time. I didn't really at that point have this big, huge vision of like, I'm going to, take her on this decade-long journey. It was just like, what was in front of me. And so I guess I say that to people listening just to encourage you, like, take a look at who's in your proximity, like who's in front of you. And it doesn't have to be these big, crazy things. It's just loving them and encouraging them and giving them opportunities to serve and to also a safe place to grow and fail and to make mistakes. So, I just think all of that is so amazing, and I love that.
Yeah, and what you just said too, Andrea, to cut you off.
Yes, please do. Jump in.
You said just like to love on them and to encourage them, and like that is mentorship. Almost like if you could boil it down, like just being around somebody, and when they do something like you just said, like when they just do something, in like whether it's playing guitar or they're like, I don't know, anything, you catch them doing something right and good, to encourage it and to be like, yes, like that is it right there. And it's so cool to see how like people so often, I think in our minds, at least for me, when you initially think of like mentorship, you think of like, it has to be this, people are coming to you and they're like, hey, we want you to mentor us. We want it to be real formal and real like, real big and like, you know what I mean? Like real flashy and like, they're like, hey, he's my mentor. I'm learning everything from him. But it's like, it never looks that way. It always looks like we're just hanging out and we're just like, you don't even realize how influential you are until one day they share a testimony and they're like, this person changed my life. Yeah. Because of something they said or just because they let me in, Yeah. And it's like, it's so cool that it's like, man, it's like Jesus said, like my yoke is easy. It's just like being able to develop people is that way when you do it like Christ. Like, hey, just hang with me, just follow me. Like, let's just go do this together. Let's do that together. And it's like, you don't have to impart all of this wisdom to them. Yeah. They'll learn, they'll watch, they'll see. And it's so cool to see that. Yeah.
Wow. That's so cool. Yeah. You're so right. And I think it made me think of, I can't remember who said it, but I was listening to, a leadership podcast, and they were talking about mentorship and how, like, you're exactly right. It kind of has this like built up, like, oh, I'm going to ask this person to be my mentor. But then also for the person that's being asked, it's like a really tall order, and you feel like, oh goodness, I don't know if I can do that or if I want to do that. And so, but it's like you said, it's more of this natural progression. It's not a sit down and will you be my mentor? I mean, I know that happens too, but it's more of like you realize in hindsight, and they may say like, no, this person was my mentor, and you're like, oh, really? Wow.
I didn't even know I was your mentor. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm honored. And I just, it's cool how when we open ourselves up to just what's in front of us, like you were saying, the things that happen and that God leads us into. So, talking about your book, and just there's a ton packed in there. Like you said, there's so much that we could pull out of it. But if there was, one or two additional sub concepts, we kind of talked about the overarching theme, but there was one or two things that you really would want people to make sure that they walk away with, whether it's a young, new worship leader or, a seasoned worship leader, what would that be?
There's so many different things that I can say right now that I feel like would be very relevant. But the one that maybe hits me the most, and this is a little bit of a sub-theme, is this idea that like we are always, so the Bible teaches that, in Christ, we've been declared new. We've been declared like God sees us through the lens of Jesus, and he sees us as who we're going to become. Mm-hmm. But at the same time, we're not there yet. And scripture teaches us that like that which Jesus, the work that Jesus started in us, he will finish. Mm-hmm. But not yet. It's a journey. Mm-hmm. And so the thing that I would say is that I think so often one of the biggest obstacles for us to leading well is knowing in the back of our minds that we don't have all of our junk figured out. We're like, I still struggle with this. How am I going to lead you to overcome your struggles? But the greatest in the kingdom, one of the verses that Jesus says, the greatest in the kingdom from the book of Matthew, is somebody who teaches the law while also practices the law. And the law, and as I would sum it up, and as Galatians 5:1 says, all of the law is summed up in this one command: love one another as yourself, as Christ loved us, right? Loving God, like the Shema, if you're familiar, like love God wholeheartedly and love your neighbor. Like that's the law. So when you think law, you think it's love. Oh, Holy Night says, right? Like his law is love. So who practices loving God and loving his neighbor while also teaching others to do that. And that's what we do as worship leaders. So in other words, we're on stage. We are telling others, hey, you guys need to walk in love. You need to follow Jesus. And all the while we feel hypocritical because we're like, I'm not exactly doing that myself. And what I would say to that is that Jesus already knew that was the model. Jesus already knew that was the right way. That is the way that we have to do it, is that we are both like being mentored and we're mentoring, right? We are both like being worked on as we are helping others at the same time. And it's something that it's so simple, yet it's so difficult to grasp sometimes, because we're like, yeah. I have to work on myself a little bit more first, and then I'll have the confidence to lead worship. I have this sin struggle that I'm really dealing with. And I feel like I just can't lead until I've, and obviously there's an element of like, yes, you need to be healthy. You need to be constantly repenting. I'm not saying don't do that, but I'm saying like, you're never going to arrive at perfection in this lifetime. So don't wait to feel like, hey, I can just lead with fullness and authority now. Christ has empowered me through the Holy Spirit to lead well now, even though I don't have it all figured out, even though I am a work in progress, So I think that's something that's just so important. And honestly, like something, and I kind of alluded to this in that, but like one of the biggest things for me as a leader, as a worship leader, is that, one of the greatest acts of worship and that we're called to is to love as Christ loved. And, even Jesus asked Peter, he's like, hey, do you love me? He's like, if you love me, then go take care of my people, go feed my sheep. Right. Yeah. And he's like, if you love me, love the people around you well. And one of the greatest things that we can do as leaders, so much of my early years of a worship leader, I was like, I don't have time for you people right now. I have to learn Ableton. I have to practice my guitar. I have to do this. I have to get all of my pitch issues under control. I have to do all of these things. And people are like, hey, man, can I talk to you for a minute? Hey, I'm busy, and realizing like, bro, I am totally missing everything right now. Like the whole point of everything is it's people over production 100% of the time. Yeah. It's not using people to pull off a production. It's the production is this train track, but like, man, people are the mission. People are the main focus. And if we can wrap our minds around that, like it's messy and people are messy and everything is messy, but it's like, man, we have to wrap our minds around the fact that like a leader, a mentor, somebody who is pastoral in heart, you have to understand that it's like, hey, it's okay. It's okay that we didn't get this right. It's okay that this isn't perfect. How can I care for you? And like, I just feel like that is something that's so easy to overlook in the busyness of our lives. But so anyways, that's something that, man, God has just taught me in a really meaningful way, I would say in the last 3 to 5 years. And it's honestly, it's changed my life in a really cool way. So that's something that I definitely come back to a lot because it's a passion of mine. And I just think it's so important.
Wow. Yeah, that is powerful. And I think that is just a really great way to end today's conversation, is just leaving everybody with that bit of wisdom and encouragement, and encouraging everybody to just lean into that, and remember that it's about loving the people around us. And we got to deal with all the things of production and all that, like the other details, of course they come, because Sunday does come every week. But that, we need to take time to slow down and pay attention to the people that God has put in our path, because I'm hearing this from you, and I know that I've found this as well, that every single situation that God has put me in ministry, even if it's been like a church that I've gone and like done a workshop with on a weekend, it has never been about the thematic material. Ever. There is always somebody, and it's usually the worship leader and their spouse, like, that needs encouragement. And, I'm going in to like teach about like tools and resources and band stuff. And then it's like, that's great. But if I like whisked in and whisked out and was like, focused so much on the music and the details, I would miss a beautiful opportunity to just encourage somebody. So
key. Yeah, that you said it. It's an opportunity. Every single time that you have practice and there's an issue or a snafu that happens, it's like we need to not see it that way, but instead see it as like, hey, this is an opportunity for discipleship, and that's what we're called to. And so seeing it that way, I think, enables us to walk in patience and to be gentle and not harsh, and to be able to understand that, like, okay, if this is what we're called to, is to make disciples and to make, help people to see Christ, how he loved us and how we can follow him and emulate him, then every time there is like that bass player who showed up and didn't practice his part, instead of being harsh and thinking, how can we get rid of this guy? We need to see this as like an opportunity to be like, how can I speak the truth to him in love? How can I show gentleness to him and walk alongside of him? And these are the cards that Jesus dealt to us. These are the people in our lives. And we need to see those as like, hey, we need to be stewards of these people and just see like, hey, this is where we're at. This is what God's called me to. Let's go, So good.
Amazing. Well, Jon, thank you so much for sharing your heart with us today and for being a part of the podcast. I just so appreciate it. And I know that everybody listening was encouraged and blessed, and they probably want your book. So I would love it if you would tell everybody where they could get in touch with you and where they can find your book.
Yeah. You can find it on Amazon. Okay. That's probably going to be the easiest way to access it. And it's on, it's digital, or it's, paperback. So cool. It's also on Audible, actually. So
awesome. Yeah. That's amazing. I love Audible.
Cool.
It's awesome. Well, amazing. Well, we will put links to your book then in the show notes, and everybody links to finding Jon on social media and stuff like that too, so you can follow along on the journey. But Jon, thank you again so much for being a part of the podcast today.
Cool. Thank you so much for having me.
Absolutely. Anytime. All right, everybody. That wraps up another episode of the Overflow Worship Podcast. We'll look forward to next time.
You've been listening to the Overflow Worship Podcast. If you enjoy our podcast, please take a moment and leave us a 5-star rating and a written review, which helps us reach more people. New episodes are released every other Monday. So until next time, thank you for listening.